The dinner bell had not even stopped ringing when the stranger's boots slammed onto the floorboards of Me's table, hard enough to rattle the spoons in their jar. Every head in the diner turned. He was tall, dust-covered, coat too fine for a cattle town, and his face was twisted with the kind of anger that made grown ranch hands go quiet and stare at their plates. He did not sit. He did not ask. He grabbed the back of a chair and dragged it across the floor with a screech that made a little girl at the corner table jump and grip her mother's sleeve. "Whatever you've got," he barked at me, "fast." A few men chuckled behind their hands. One old rancher leaned toward his friend and whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear, "That fool's gonna learn me don't hurry for no one." Someone else muttered that a man dressed like that had no business in a place like this, that he'd probably spit the beans right back out. Me did not raise her voice. She did not even look rattled. She wiped her hands slow on her apron, walked to the stove, and did something nobody expected. She ignored him completely. She finished ladling stew for the two hands who'd been waiting first, set down fresh coffee for the old widow by the window, and only then turned to the stranger's plate. The room went still, waiting to see if he'd explode. He didn't. He just sat there, jaw tight, watching this woman in a flour-dusted apron make him wait like any other man. When the plate finally came, cornbread, ham hock beans, a slice of peach pie warm from the oven, he ate like a man starving. Halfway through the pie, his hand began to shake. "Who taught you to cook like that?" he asked, voice suddenly soft, almost breaking. 6 weeks had passed, and Me had almost stopped watching the road. Then, one dusty evening, she heard hooves slow outside her window. She looked up from the stove, and there he was again, Jacob Ashford, the rich cattleman, standing in her doorway like he wasn't sure he should be there at all. This time he did not bark orders. He waited his turn, same as the ranch hands ahead of him, and when he finally sat down, he did something that made the whole diner go quiet with surprise. He took off his hat. "I never gave you my name," he said. "It's Jacob Ashford." A ranch hand near the counter choked on his coffee. Everyone in 3 counties knew that name. Whispers started at once. The Ashford, the richest man in the valley, sitting at a crooked counter in a diner with a smoking stove, holding his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. Me just studied him for a long moment. "As in the Ashford cattle empire?" she asked, careful, not impressed the way most folks would be. "The same," he admitted, and looked almost ashamed of it, which surprised her more than his money did. They talked long after the other customers left, the lanterns burning low. Me told him about her dream of a real restaurant, with tablecloths and an oven that didn't smoke. She told him about her husband buried under the cottonwood tree and the wildflowers she brought him every Sunday. Jacob grew quiet when it was his turn to speak. He told her about his cold father, his loveless marriage, the wife who left taking nothing but her freedom. He told her about his house with 14 rooms and a table built for 20, where he ate alone every single night. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes," he said, staring into his empty bowl, "and I have not tasted a meal cooked with love since I was a boy, until I sat in your chair." Me said nothing. She only refilled his coffee, slow and quiet, and let the silence answer for her. The fire came in the dead of night, and by morning there was nothing left to save. Me stood in the blackened ruins of everything she had built, her mother's old cast-iron pot clutched to her chest, the only thing she'd managed to drag from the flames. Ash still drifted in the air like gray snow. Neighbors gathered at a careful distance, murmuring low, not sure what to say to a woman who had just lost everything twice in one lifetime. She did not cry loud. She just sat down on an overturned crate and stared at nothing, silent, while the whole town watched and did not know how to help her. Word reached Jacob Ashford by afternoon. He rode into Willow Creek so hard his horse came in soaked with sweat, and he did something that made every rancher and shopkeeper on Main Street stop and stare. He got off his horse, walked straight into the ash and soot in his fine city boots, and knelt down beside her. "I'll rebuild it," he said. "Twice the size, my men, my lumber, whatever it takes." "No," Mies said sharply, looking up at him with red, proud eyes. "I won't take your charity, Jacob Ashford. I built everything with my own 2 hands. I won't have this town saying I got rich off a rancher's pity." The crowd went quiet, waiting to see what the rich man would do with her refusal. Jacob did not argue. He did not stand back up either. He stayed kneeling right there in the ruins, ruining his fine trousers, and took her flour-dusted hand in his. "It's not pity," he said, low and steady. "I've eaten in the finest halls of St. Louis, served by French cooks with more training than most doctors. Not one of them ever made me feel what I feel at your counter. That's not something money buys, so don't you dare call it charity." He held her hand tighter. "I'm not asking to rebuild your diner because I feel sorry for you," he said. "I'm asking because I don't want one more Sunday alone in that empty house. I want a reason to come home. I think you might be it." Me's tears came harder then, but this time they were a different kind of tears. A year had passed since the fire, and the whole town gathered under the old cottonwood tree to see something nobody thought they'd live to witness. Me stood in a plain white dress, no lace, no silk, just something she'd sewn herself, and beside her stood Jacob Ashford, the richest man in 3 counties, dressed no finer than any ranch hand in the crowd. He had asked to be married right there, under that very tree where Me's first husband was buried, and when folks whispered that it was strange, Me had simply said grief and love did not have to fight each other. There was room enough in a heart for both. The county clerk stood ready. The whole town held its breath. Then Jacob did something nobody expected, not even me. Before the vows began, he pulled out a folded paper and read it aloud to the crowd. The deed to half his father's ranch land, signed over that morning, sold quiet, and used to rebuild not just a diner, but a real restaurant with glass windows and a good iron stove, and a small house behind it with a garden for me to tend. "I didn't build this for pity," he told the crowd, echoing the very words he'd said to her in the ashes. "I built it because I finally have a reason to come home." The town murmured, some in shock, some wiping their eyes. That summer, Me's table reopened under a new sign, carved by Jacob's own clumsy hands, though he'd never carved a thing in his life. It read simply, "Mae and Jacobs all are fed here." True to it, no hungry soul was ever turned away. Every evening after the last dish was dried, Jacob sat at that same counter where it all began, and asked her the same question, soft now, like a love song instead of a demand. "Me, who taught you to cook like that?" And every time, she gave the same soft answer. "My mother taught me love goes into the food," she'd say, taking his hand. "But it was you who taught me love could come back out of it too, and fill up a whole table again."